Congressional investigators are making it clear they want to hear from numero uno, Trump ally and the leader of the House Republicans, Kevin McCarthy. They've asked him for an interview that would be testimony, a big deal, as well as cooperation to provide information. And they also are signaling, as they have in some of these other dramatic letters, there was the one that went out to Sean Hannity and other people, the information they've already gathered. This new letter, which came out late today, has the committee asking about a, quote, very heated conversation with Trump that took place during this insurrection, where, according to this committee, this is their characterization you see on your screen, McCarthy was privately urging Trump to get help to the Capitol. That's bad for Donald Trump if it speaks to the culpability he had and what he knew in real time. It also, according to the committee, notes that Trump privately admitted to McCarthy, quote, some degree of responsibility for this insurrection. That's a big deal as more details of the coup spill out. And then the committee requests to meet with McCarthy, and he is, of course, just down the hall on February 3rd or 4th. Now, this is a bit unusual in interesting ways. McCarthy is actually the third lawmaker that this committee has asked to cooperate. Now, he would also be the first to actually do so if he comes forward. And while you may think, well, why would any of these Republicans who have become just so obsequious to Donald Trump and the rioters themselves? Well, it's McCarthy who said in public in May, sure, he'd testify.
Would you be willing to testify about your conversation with Donald Trump on January 6th if you were asked by an outside commission?
Sure.
You
Next
would.
question.
Sure. Next question. You see the vibe. You also see the political implication there. This was kind of dismissed getting in. He dismissed getting into it because he was trying to convey a type of strength or basically that this was a no-brainer. But, well, now they're calling him on it. This committee is also referencing comments in their letter that McCarthy last year was also the one who implicated Donald Trump in leading this criminal insurrection.
The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress by mob rioters. He should have immediately denounced the mob when he saw what was unfolding. These facts require immediate action by President Trump. Accept his share of responsibility, quell the brewing unrest, and ensure President-elect Biden is able to successfully begin his term.
What you just saw a year ago tomorrow is what it looks like when a Republican leader stands up to Donald Trump. Indeed, if McCarthy had continued to sound like that, had been consistent at all, maybe this request wouldn't feel like such a big deal or a test for him. But of course, he's changed. The party continues to change. It has hit new low after new low. All of this dates back, at least according to the public information we have, to McCarthy's weird, that's my news anchor word for it, weird visit to Mar-a-Lago. It was January, just a couple weeks after what I just showed you. What did they discuss? What deals were hatched? And why did that begin his public change from holding the man you see in the photo accountable for what he called a criminal insurrection there to what he's doing now? Now, in this news, the committee is also asking about Trump's, quote, state of mind during that period and the decisions that were made during and after the insurrection. Now, as we've reported, this is also unprecedented legal territory. Everything going on here is important, but not everything is clearly required. That's why the letter asked for voluntary cooperation. That's why many experts say that while Mr. McCarthy has an obligation to cooperate, he has an obligation to his own words from a few months ago, there is nothing in legal precedent that would suggest that this is an open and shut case. With that context in play, we now turn to our experts. On the law, former SDNY civil prosecutor Maya Wiley. And on the Congress and the politics, political strategist Zeke Emmanuel, a veteran of the Obama campaign. Maya, where does it go from here? And Kevin McCarthy said he would testify. If he did, does that stand to provide information that is useful to this probe?
Well, look, I don't know that we know where it goes from here for the reasons that you just said, Ari. We know that he has been asked to voluntarily come and talk to the committee. He says no. A voluntary request, remember, is not a subpoena and is not a legal obligation to appear. So then the committee has to decide, are we going to subpoena him? And I think we heard Congressman Benny Thompson say, we'll consider it. That's not the same thing as saying we will do it. And as you pointed out, there is a disagreement about this, certainly not an open shut case. I do want to point out that Congress has the power to subpoena its own members for the Ethics Committee. And while it is unprecedented, I think it's an interesting argument to ask, well, if Congress has the power to ask you to appear before it as a member of Congress for being unethical, why can't it ask you to do the same for potentially being unlawful? Think about it that way. So the arguments are very interesting. I think you just got a sense of what side of the arguments I fall on, because I don't see a prohibition to it either. But certainly there are real policy and political concerns to doing it. We don't know what the committee will do. That may be much more of a political question. But I do want to say, as a matter of evidence, we already know that there's evidence, right? Because the committee, in its letter asking for voluntary cooperation, as well as what Kevin McCarthy has said publicly, establishes he thinks Trump was wrong. He had a heated argument with Donald Trump on January 6th. Donald Trump did not respond to trying to prevent the violence, and in fact said maybe, or at least reportedly said, those people seem to be more upset about this than you, meaning they're protecting me, you're not. And so it's not as if there isn't an evidentiary record, and we should remember that even if the committee does not get the cooperation of Representative McCarthy.
Yeah, I think you put your finger on it, Maya, when you go to the fact that there was this reported, heated, clashing conversation at a time. When people are afraid of being beaten or killed, the mind does get clearer. That much we know. And so there was an anger and a righteousness and a concern from Mr. McCarthy as he and other members, Republican and Democratic alike, by the way, I don't particularly care when it comes to these types of matters, but were in danger and what he said to Trump. Maya also makes an expert legal point that if it's good enough for ethics, is it good enough for protecting the country and democracy itself? That's an interesting way to put it. Che, that's because she's good at lawyering. As for Che, he's good at understanding the politics. You said on this program, Che, months before it became more publicly evident or mainstream, you said that the GOP was becoming a, quote, riot-adjacent party. And that was close enough to January that it felt like, wow. And now I don't think that's in dispute when you got Ted Cruz and others running around to Tucker Carlson to get publicly, verbally slapped for even hinting at the fact that it was a white MAGA terror mob. With that in mind, Che, I want to play something we have from the record. You guys will listen to this with me together, how Kevin McCarthy sounded in those moments I just mentioned. He did a live phone call, so you don't see his face, but you hear his voice. This was as the insurrection was still unfolding. Take a listen.
I was very clear with the president when I called him. This has to stop, and he's got to go to the American public and tell them to stop this.
Why hasn't he walked down and said that now?
I conveyed to the president what I think is best to do, and I'm hopeful the president will do it.
And have you spoken with his chief of staff?
I've spoken to the president. I've spoken to other people in there and to the White House as well.
Che.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that Kevin McCarthy probably believed on January 7th was that Trump was done. The critics have been proven right, that this man was a wannabe dictator, that even the GOP grassroots was going to roundly reject him. That turned out to be completely false. And the minute he realized that, that's when he made a beeline right for Mar-a-Lago. There was a very famous King of France, Henry Navarre, who converted from Protestant to Catholic to become King of France. And when asked why he did it, he said Paris was worth a mass. And I think Kevin McCarthy realized that the speakership is worth not only one trip to Mar-a-Lago, but any number of trips to Mar-a-Lago. Any amount of groveling or indignities that he has to bear from Donald Trump, he will do because he only wants one thing, the speaker's gavel. And he will basically be happy to preside over the ruins of American democracy to do it.
Well,
so I would not expect him to cooperate with this.
Let's take your point, because he went to Mar-a-Lago basically within weeks after saying this on January 13th.
What we saw last week was not the American way. Neither is the continued rhetoric that Joe Biden is not the legitimate president. Let's be clear. Joe Biden will be sworn in as president of the United States in 1 week because he won the election.
because he won the election. It's on record there on the House floor. And yet, Che, can Kevin McCarthy or other Republican leaders, are they allowed to say that fact anymore?
No, they are not. Donald Trump made it very clear they are not. And Kevin McCarthy realized very quickly that if he wants to maintain his lifelong dream of being speaker, he had to go to Mar-a-Lago, bend the knee to Trump, and basically kiss his ring and do what he wanted. So I don't expect any further cooperation from Kevin McCarthy on this. I think he's going to fight this every step of the way. He's going to try to fight this and try to avoid giving the testimony under oath that everybody knows that he would probably have to give, which is Donald Trump was very interested on January 6th in the complete overthrow of American democracy.
Maya?
Look, I don't see any reason why Representative McCarthy would cooperate. I think for all the reasons that we've just been talking about. I will say this. We have just pointed out that he's already admitted it on the public record, in his own words, and that there are obviously witnesses to that phone call on January 6th that also heard expletives, heard statements, and that there's other evidence. So even if we don't get the satisfaction of seeing Representative McCarthy have to come and speak to the people's representatives, we do know, and it already is a matter of record, and there will be more in the record as a result of the committee's work.
Yeah, all interesting points on a story that was breaking that really rose to the top of our news hour here as we saw the letter late in the day. This doesn't happen every day on the beat, but I can actually say for two distinct newsworthy reasons, Maya and Che both return on other topics later in the program. So I'll see you. Turning to some COVID headlines tonight, get this. One, a very famous American political leader is telling everyone to get vaccinated and calling out Republican politicians who get vaxxed and then muddy the issue as gutless cowards. Two, a famous voice with millions of followers is saying basically everyone's going to get COVID anyway. All right, here we go. If you are thinking that it sounds kind of like Joe Biden and Joe Rogan, well, those two voices are actually Donald Trump pushing the vaccine and Dr. Fauci saying Omicron's so contagious, everyone will get it. Now, I'll get to Fauci in a second, but first, here's Trump.
I've taken it. I've had the booster. Many politicians, I watched a couple of politicians be interviewed, and one of the questions was, did you get the booster? Because they had the vaccine. And they're answering it like, in other words, the answer is yes, but they don't want to say it. Because they're gutless. You got to say it. But the fact is that I think the vaccine has saved tens of millions of people throughout the world.
The vaccine saves lives. He's got the vaccine. Top Republican officials have the vaccine, and Donald Trump is doing what he does in his own way, crushing them as cowards for the way they're handling it. He's referencing, of course, Republicans who dodge. People can interpret who that is. But for an example, here is Republican Governor Ron DeSantis.
Have you gotten the booster?
So I've done whatever I did, the normal shot, and that at the end of the day is people's individual decisions about what they want to do.
At this rate, DeSantis could be on his way to his own nickname, maybe Governor Gutless, quoting Trump. And this kind of doubt, sowing it and pushing it, it does reduce vaccinations at a time when people are more likely than ever to get COVID. And that brings us to Dr. Fauci's sort of Joe Rogan moment.
I think in many respects, Omicron, with its extraordinary, unprecedented degree of efficiency of transmissibility, will ultimately find just about everybody.
Most people are going to get COVID. All right. And what we need to do is make sure the hospitals can still function.
This is the latest from scientific experts who are dealing with the data and the facts. But at the same time, we know that since the dawn of COVID, it has been a hallmark of right-wing thought to argue everyone will get it, so just let that happen and move on. Now, that's what I mean by a sort of Joe Rogan echo here. The popular podcaster has carved his own set of right-wing talking points about COVID and these issues. So why am I telling you this? Well, the scientists also stress that while there is a language overlap here, to focus only on that without the wider data would miss the whole point. Getting the more deadly version of COVID before vaccines were available was not a road to moving on. it was a road to ventilators, possibly death. Now, years into it, a global pandemic, the strains of COVID have changed, as have the tools we have, the policy tools, the medical tools. And so we're actually living through a time where the scientific plans are also changing in response. My job is to be clear, so let me try to be as clear as possible. Vaccines are the seatbelt. They don't prevent all the crashes, but the global data we have shows they save your life. And that means if everyone's on their way to getting COVID, you are better off with the seatbelt on than without it. Now, is there a possible upside here to a world where, in a sense, Donald Trump sounds like Fauci and Fauci sounds like Rogan? We're going to get into that with our own lighthearted way, because we don't try to get too bummed out here, but also with our experts, Dr. Emmanuel and Chai Komanduri, when we're back after our shortest break in 60 seconds. We are back during an interesting time for COVID headlines and are joined by Dr. Zeke Emmanuel. He advised Obama and Biden on health policy, and back with us, an Obama campaign veteran, Chai Komanduri. Doctor, we've got Trump sounding like Fauci. We've got Fauci sounding a bit like Rogan. I walked people through some of that, but walk us through what you see here in a week where, for really the first time ever, some of the most high-level government scientists are saying everyone will probably get it.
Well, I do think what has changed is the incredible infectivity of Omicron and the fact that it's much, much more mild. We have very good data that the hospitalization time, if you end up in the hospital from Omicron, is 1.5 days compared to 5 days with Delta, and that very few people actually die, 1 in 34,000 if you're vaccinated. And so I think it is right. You've got a much more infectious COVID virus going around. But we also, as you point out, we have protection so that we minimize the risk. That's what we said when we said it's going to become endemic. It's just going to be one of those respiratory viruses. And if we're well protected, we can easily live with it. We, however, have to get down from 1,750 deaths a day that we're having today to under 300.
Chai, your thoughts on all of it, including the Joe Rogan echo?
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about politically the thing that was hurting Biden the most was the idea that he has not returned the country to the pre-pandemic normal. Now, it's very possible, based on everything that we know, that we will never return to the pre-pandemic normal for unvaccinated people. But we could return to a pre-pandemic normal for vaccinated people. And I think politically, that's actually fine. If you look at the evidence, Joe Biden was very popular when vaccinated people didn't have to wear masks and unvaccinated people did. His polling slide actually begins in mid-July when the CDC said vaccinated people have to wear masks, basically eradicating the distinction between vaccinated and unvaccinated people. So I do think politically it would be fine for us to set a goal that we want to return to a pre-pandemic normal for vaccinated people. It is something Democrats can rally around. It's something that we will have the science behind us to. And it is something that I think would be a very strong message for us going into the midterms, that we, at least for vaccinated people, people who follow the rules, get vaccinated, get boosted, they can live a normal life as we defined it in, say, 2019.
Yeah, I think that's understandable. And Dr. Emmanuel, I want to ask you about Donald Trump as this advocate of vaccination, boosters, facts. He sounds a lot like Fauci. We put something together I'm going to play that really will let people decide that for themselves. But it's also a reminder of how hyperpartisanship or even emotional anger and hate is really bad for figuring out the individual facts in any situation. There are people who have really strong opposition to Donald Trump for really good reasons. I don't have to list them off. It does not mean that everything he ever says is wrong or bad. And he is right now one of the most vocal vaccine advocates on the right with one of the largest followings. And yet that seems to be underplayed for structural reasons we can get into. But having said that, we put this together. Take a look.
The vaccine is one of the greatest achievements of mankind. The ones that get very sick and go to the hospital are the ones that don't take their vaccine.
We know that vaccination prevents the vast majority of serious COVID-19 illness, hospitalizations, and deaths.
Look, the results of the vaccine are very good. And if you do get it, it's a very minor form. People aren't dying when they take the vaccine. And if you take the vaccine, you're protected.
We all want normalcy in America. The highway to that normalcy is vaccination.
Everybody go get your shot.
The president and I are vaxxed, and did you get the booster?
Yes.
These vaccines save people's lives.
I recommend take the vaccines. I did it. It's good.
Dr. Emmanuel, is he right? And should the public health community, as well as whatever you want to say about your Democratic colleagues, be embracing that more?
First of all, I do think he has, come to recognize that, in fact, it's good to take advantage of the vaccine. He did a remarkable job with developing it, and I think he now wants to take more credit for that. In addition, I think he does recognize that the people who are getting sick are the unvaccinated who are his supporters. That's not a good thing overall. I'm not a psychiatrist, but that seems to me to be the trend of what his comments are directed at. And look, I've talked about when he first took office, I talked to him a lot about health care.
When you say something interesting, I gotta stop you as a reporter. What do you mean psychologically you think that's powering him?
Oh, I think the fact that he's the one under whose watch we did develop those vaccines. We have to be honest about it. And Warp Speed went through with him. And I think he wants to take credit for it. He likes to take credit for everything that he can do. So this is one more thing he's going to take credit for. And, not wrong. He did have an important role to play in that.
And the harder part for you then is, we mentioned, you just talked about, most doctors don't also casually mention which presidents they've advised. Do you think that this Biden administration should do more with what's sitting out here, which is the rare Biden-Trump alliance on telling everyone to get vaccinated?
Well, look, I think it's great that he's endorsed it. How they use it for information, how they use it to discredit the misinformation, that's going to be critical. And I agree with you. When truth hits you in the face, embrace it.
Chai?
Well, Trump is doing this more for personal ego than for public health. But quite frankly, I think most Americans who care about the future of the country will take it. We'll take him being an egomaniac about wanting credit for the vaccine if it can get more people vaccinated and us back to a pre-pandemic normal. But I think what we've also seen the last couple of weeks is the beginning of the GOP primary. Make no mistake, Donald Trump was clearly shooting at the bow of Ron DeSantis. He was saying that I will go to war with you on this. And we're going to see who has the real loyalty of the MAGA grassroots. Ron DeSantis has been kind of a GOP leader in mainstreaming vaccine skepticism in the Republican Party. And Donald Trump wants no part of it because that kind of gets in the way of his ego. And for Donald Trump, nothing should get in the way of his ego.
I think we covered this from a lot of different angles. I will say, in fairness to what we don't know, neither the experts nor myself have the brain scan, the MRI, or the ego X-ray here, so that is somewhat speculative. But through this conversation, we're talking about something deeply important, which is that the scientists and every living former president and the current president are all on record about the science working and the vaccine saving lives at a time when COVID's surging. So that's the information people can process. Dr. Emmanuel and Chai Komanduri, thank you both. Up ahead, you may